Back in the early 2010s, first-person shooter genre hit the game industry like a plague. Call of Duty and Battlefield were so successful and so profitable that every other AAA studio realized they were losing money by not copying the formula. That's when Halo decided to ditch what made it special and tried to replicate Call of Duty. Resident Evil 5 was made with the action as its primary focus to attract more players. Fast forward, and this approach almost destroyed both franchises, and Halo is still trying to fix the terrible roadmap it built a decade ago. With Souls-likes, we're almost going through the same situation again. From Software's Souls games were so successful that they created a new subgenre, where games are made with the intention of being like a Souls game. But this time, unlike Call of Duty meta in the game industry, the Souls-like situation is far more different and complex. Now, there's a term called cargo cults. No idea what it is, but you never heard of it before, you silly. Back in the 1940s, in the heat of World War II, something interesting happened in the South Pacific Islands. When the foreign forces redirected their resources into building infrastructure, the indigenous people of Melanesia had a very different perspective of what was happening. Tall radio towers, runways, docks, and occasional military drills were foreign concepts. However, these rituals appear to be quite successful in summoning ancestral gods in the form of giant birds that brought medicine and goods to the island. When the foreign forces left at the end of World War II, locals tried to replicate the radio towers, military equipment, and even the military drills in hopes of summoning cargo ships and planes they believed to be deities. Replicating a series of events without understanding the structure of what makes them work was later called the cargo cult phenomenon. On the surface, From Software games, just like many other big franchises, have defining gameplay principles. When you think of a Souls game, you can probably picture a structure in your mind. Bonfires, stamina management, evasion-based combat, bosses past their prime. On the surface, these are the aspects that make a Souls game function. And yeah, that is true, but can a Souls-like be successful without understanding its underlying infrastructure? Just by following a textbook and adding design choices visible on the surface, can you really make a Souls-like? Well, yes, the Melanesians were quite successful in replicating almost everything they saw during the World War. Warplanes, military equipment, drills, but they never received any gifts from their ancestor gods once the war ended. So yes, you can absolutely make a Souls-like by copying bonfires, Estus Flask and combat, but building a functional Souls-like that captures the complexity hidden underneath is an entirely different concept. If you check the Souls-like tag on Steam, you will see hundreds of games that have no business being in that category. The genre is so widely used that any game with a stamina bar and a dodge button instantly slaps on that fancy Souls-like tag. Well, I've been playing Souls games ever since Dark Souls 1 came out, and ever since then I've been trying to figure out what makes them so special. When I saw the Lords of the Fallen reveal back in 2013, I was mind blown. I was incredibly hyped to play more games like Dark Souls. Then the game came out, it looked like Dark Souls, it had similar atmosphere, and the gameplay was close enough. But every single part of the game felt wrong. Everything about the game tried so hard to be the next Dark Souls, but it was inferior in every way. It was also the first of many Souls-likes I quit halfway through when I realized I could just replay Dark Souls instead of an inferior copy. Obviously, the industry has learned a lot about the Souls and Souls-like games since then, and for every 10 underwhelming Souls-likes, we now get one amazing title like Lies of P, the first Berserker Khazan, Nioh 2, or Another Crab's Treasure. But this distinction between cash grab Souls-likes and genuinely great ones that fly dangerously close to From Software titles raises an important question. What makes a good Souls-like? Think of the setting in Dark Souls trilogy. The world is depressing, grey clouds, crumbling settlements, abandoned castles. It has everything a dark fantasy world needs, but building a dark, depressing, scary world by itself is not a practice that will succeed by default. Lords of the Fallen 2014 tried so hard to be the next Dark Souls. Big castles, ruined settlements, clouds blocking the sun, whatever. It had everything Dark Souls did. It wanted to look like Dark Souls. But the charm of From Software games doesn't come from the color palette or the overall setting. To create a good setting, you need environmental storytelling. The Dark Souls trilogy, well, actually all From Software Souls games reuse enemies quite often, but they somehow avoid that feeling where the game becomes too repetitive. Well, that comes from how the game tells you a story through its map. Repeating enemies serve a purpose, there's a logic behind it. There are demons in the destroyed streets of Lordran's old settlement, but where do they come from? When you visit Lost Isolate, you see the remnants of an ancient civilization, which was destroyed when the witches of Isolate gave birth to the chaos while trying to replicate the first flame. Now demons are lurking among the ruins of their kingdom. New Londo was a mighty kingdom drowned by the lords of Anor Londo shortly after aligning itself with the Abyss. Shulva was a pygmy kingdom, worshipping a slumbering dragon. When the Drakeblood Knights awakened the dragon in a failed attempt to slay it, Sin, the slumbering dragon, destroyed the entire city with massive poison clouds. Lifeless dragons lying around Lothric Castle, crucified tarnished warriors around Volcano Manor, sunlight representing a way out in Archdragon Peak. Well, if you're interested in Souls and Souls-like games, there's a good chance some of those locations scratched your curiosity. Deep within the setting, a background for different locations and a wider story explaining the overall setting is a must. In the new Lords of the Fallen, you can already see the difference. It is no longer a dark fantasy world that feels like a budget version of Dark Souls, but it is something entirely new with its own conflict and reasoning. Humanity banishes the shady god Adir, and with the freedom that follows, they enter a new golden age. But the holy religion they create slowly becomes more and more zealous. Over time, it turns into a sadistic belief that brings a horrifying end to anyone who doesn't devote themselves to it. The events of Lords of the Fallen begin when Adir returns to punish those who betrayed him, and now you're stuck between two factions, each worse than the other. Shortly after, as if those two sides were not enough, the putrid mother from Umbral emerges to consume all life. You can stick to Radiance, let the New Order banish the invaders once again. But once you fulfill your duty, you will be thrown away like a scrap. You can serve Adir, join his demons, and raise everything in your path. You will erase civilization from the surface of the earth and destroy anyone who betrayed him. But in the end, Adir will protect the remaining humans and help them build a new world. Or you can side with the putrid mother and seize all that exists. Setting in a Souls game can be anything. Another Crab's Treasure is about a hermit crab losing his home because he didn't pay his taxes. Now he has to run around doing a bunch of errands so he can buy his house back. There are underwater ruins, settlements built around reefs, sand castles. The best part is how much the game commits to its setting to fit Souls mechanics into a cartoony, fun game about a hermit crab committing tax fraud. The main currency is microplastics. You use trash as temporary shields, and Estus Flask is replaced by kelp. When I played the game for the first time, yeah, sure, it is a Souls-like, it didn't reinvent the wheel, but it never felt like it was made to capitalize on From Software's popularity. It felt like a unique game that borrows Souls mechanics to enrich an already existing structure. Lies of P feels like it was made by From Software. In my opinion, it is the best Souls-like game and almost as good as the original Souls games. But they didn't achieve that by simply copying what Dark Souls did back then. Lies of P's setting unfolds like chapters of a novel. When you start the game, you witness horrifying events caused by the puppets. They seem to change overnight and begin burning the entire city down. In my first 1 or 2 hours, I thought, yeah, this is another Souls game where enemies went hollow and the story takes place in a ruined city past its prime. Because, well, that's the default setup for these games, right? People go mad or hollow or whatever, and that's the setting. But eventually you make it out of the city and turns out the puppets are not the only problem. There are a bunch of factions that look like zombies. Turns out there's a disease, petrification disease. Basically, disease equals bad. It spreads quickly, wrecks the economy, and people go insane. A group of alchemists try to cure it, but somehow they make it even worse. Their failed experiment turned infected people into carcasses that roam the streets and cause minor inconvenience to the citizens of Kratz. The initial hours of the game are straightforward. Things attack you for some reason, so you hit them back. Over time, you learn the motivation behind the puppets, who controls them, why they do what they are doing, and you realize they are not purely evil. You learn what caused these carcasses and who's responsible. And turns out they're also not purely evil. You meet the Stalkers, a group of people who are just trying to survive this madness. You even learn why you resurrect at bonfire when you die, which is an amazing touch because there are very few Souls-likes that bother to even justify the resurrection mechanic. Setting can be anything as long as it is not a simple dark fantasy people went mad cliché. My favorite Souls-like after Lies of P is No Rest for the Wicked. It is a beautiful game that deserves far more recognition. The game starts on a ship, your destination is a distant island nobody really wants to go. The way crew treats you implies that you're important but not really liked, similar to how Witchers are treated. Soon after, your ship is boarded by trained soldiers from the island. You learn this place is extremely isolated and they are willing to do anything to keep you away. They tell you that you're too late, you're not welcome here, it's all over. And then the ship sinks and you find yourself stranded on this island anyway. A follow-up cinematic shows that the king is dead, his order is crumbling, and the new king is already under someone else's influence. He is stubborn, spoiled, and willing to sacrifice anything for what he believes is the right choice. Within the first 10 minutes of the game, you learn so much without being directly told what the story is even about. When you think of it, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro don't seem like story-heavy games, but Souls games are actually story-heavy adventures with an action RPG sprinkled on top. Naturally, good Souls-likes follow the same philosophy. Setting is a major part of this genre. The ability to tell a story without directly telling it is difficult, but it is one of the most important things that make these games engaging. But obviously, this is only one piece of what makes a decent Souls-like. A Souls-like doesn't need to be difficult, what it needs is a fair challenge. Every Souls game shares a similar understanding of difficulty. Put an obstacle in front of the player, not with the intention of stopping them, but to train and encourage them. This is the part most Souls-likes get wrong. It is true that From Software titles can be difficult, there's no denying that. But difficulty is never the main goal of these games. The year is 2017, I have finally reached the Dark Eater Midir. I have encountered Midir multiple times before, but now it is time for the real fight. I spent an hour running back and forth between the bonfire and the boss arena because I couldn't figure out his moveset. He is constantly running around, flying away, his head moves too much, and attacking his legs barely does any damage. Fast forward to today, now I know exactly what to do so Midir doesn't spend half the fight running away. I know all his openings, when to attack, and how many hits I can land before he moves again. It is the same boss fight as it was back then, it is just as hard as it was on release, but the game is designed in such a way that once you learn what to do, all annoying parts of the fight disappear. Baal was the most difficult dragon boss in Elden Ring, if you ignore that one annoying ancient dragon on the way to Baal. Now, Baal is my favorite level 1 boss in Elden Ring after Mesmer. There are no difficulty sliders, no cheese mechanics, it is the same boss, still challenging, but fair. Once you learn his mechanics, aside from that one annoying breath attack, there isn't a single unfair move in the entire fight. Baal, Midir, Gale, Mesmer, these bosses don't try to cheat just to be slightly harder. And that's the exact difference between a challenging fair boss and a boss that is trying too hard to be difficult. When designing challenging encounter or a difficult boss fight, you need to ask yourself one simple question. Will this obstacle frustrate the player, or will it encourage them to explore more in the game? And speaking of boss fights are the backbone of a Souls game. But how do you create a good boss fight? Why do Artorias, Gale, or that newborn baby from Bloodborne who never stops screaming work so well? What's the connection between these bosses? Well, sure, they are difficult, but that can't be the only reason they are considered masterpieces, right? Maybe it's because they're all Berserk references? I mean, Artorias and Gale are basically gods, and if you think about it, Orphan of Kos is kind of the embodiment of Berserk fanbase. I don't know. So what actually make a great boss? When I think of my favorite bosses from Souls and Souls-like genre, Mesmer, Gale, Ivory King, Baal, Dragon Slayer, Armor, Midra, whatever, there are a lot of great bosses, but why do they work? While thinking about it, I realized it makes sense to categorize boss fights to understand each type individually. Not every boss can be great, and not every boss should be great. For some boss fights to stand out, you need others that don't carry the same weight, and that's where filler bosses come in. Elden Ring sets the bar impossibly high with Soldier of Godric. You then spend the next 20 hours trying to find a boss that can replicate that peak. 67 years since the first video game was ever made, and all those technological advancements brought us the inevitable masterpiece you know as Rick, Soldier of God. And where do you even go from here? How do you even design a boss that surpasses God Soldier, Rick? Well, think about your favorite major boss fights across different games. Most memorable boss encounters come with strong build-up and clear motivation, even when the encounter itself is a surprise. Take first Elden Lord Godfrey for instance. What do we know about him? Throughout the game he is described as the first Elden Lord, the strongest tarnished, a man who ascended to godhood through sheer power. But during your journey through Lands Between, you're told Godfrey was exiled and brutally slain by terrifying foes beyond the fog. Later, you learn the truth. He was only exiled when there were no enemies left. He left the Lands Between to seek stronger foes and grow even more powerful. For most of the game, that's all you know. You see portraits, you read item descriptions and fight a weak projection of him. After a long journey, when you return to the Earth Tree to ascend as the Elden Lord, there's another fog wall waiting. But wait. Morgoth is gone, it can't be him again. Something new is waiting. As you enter through that fog wall, you see a grace pointing towards you. Queen Marika is guiding another tarnished in your general direction. And there stands Godfrey. Throughout the entire game, you've been following Marika's guidance to defeat bosses and earn your ascension. But now it is clear, she is also guiding Godfrey. You are now the final obstacle standing between him and the Elden Beast. During his phase transition, Godfrey breaks his shackles, banishes Sarosh and returns to his primal form. With that act alone, he undoes millennia of progress, returning to who he was before Marika ever set foot in the Lands Between. At that moment, it is clear, you're a worthy opponent. He is willing to sacrifice everything to defeat you. You are the nameless warrior who slew his demigod children, killed the last giant he spared, and hunted down Placidusax, the true first Elden Lord. Godfrey is a legendary figure admired by every demigod, but to him, you are the most important enemy to have ever existed. A similar but more distant example exists in Dark Souls with Gwyn. The god of sunlight is described as the mightiest being in Lordran. He slew the immortal dragons, conquered the world, and ushered in an age of fire. You see his statues everywhere, you walk through the kingdoms he built and destroyed, and when you finally meet him, he is a broken soul, his mind fractured, barely able to wield his sword. Once a god beyond anything Lordran had ever known, now condemned to eternal suffering at the kill of the First Flame, just to keep his dying age alive. Mesmer from 2014 hit game Just Dance Now has one of the strongest motivations in the series. As you explore the Land of Shadow, you see scorched villages and ruined cities. Mesmer's castle towers above everything he destroyed. He's a tyrant ruling an entire continent alone. But as you dig deeper, you learn the truth. Mesmer is Marika's first child. He spent his entire life serving her. When the Horns End, an evil civilization, ruled the land, they sought to erase every other civilization. They imprisoned and experimented on Marika's people. Mesmer stood against them. He built an army from nothing and defeated a vastly superior kingdom. He spent centuries trying to cure shamans, hoping to ease Marika's pain. And then Marika abandoned him, left him to rot in the Land of Shadow. So, when Mesmer sees you standing in his chamber, he sees a lowly tarnish chosen over Marika's firstborn. He blames you for Marika's betrayal. But as the fight progresses, Mesmer changes. By the end, he no longer blames you. His false devotion fades, and as he dies, he curses Marika, regretting everything he sacrificed for a tyrant who discarded him. Mesmer's story evolves constantly without direct exposition. The game places his tragedy in front of you and lets you piece it together. In Lies of P, when Laxasia casually obliterates the boss you were fighting, you immediately know something special is coming. In No Rest for the Wicked, the opening cinematic sets up the antagonists. None of them look powerful, which only makes the eventual climax more interesting. For major boss fights, strong setting, build-up and motivation are essential. Dragon Slayer Armor is an excellent boss fight, but people rarely talk about it in the same way as they talk about Gale, Sister Frida or Fume Knight or Artorias. So, to build a good boss fight, you also need a good motivation and a good build-up. But obviously this is not the only part that makes these games special. The next one is... have you ever launched a game, played for a few hours and then just never felt like playing it again? You probably have games sitting in your library right now, taking up space, waiting for that one day you will finally play it. Pacing is the biggest reason you either finish a game or abandon it. This happened to me with one of my favorite games of all time, Yakuza 0. On 2 separate occasions I played the first 2 hours of the game and didn't touch it again for an entire year. On my 3rd attempt I forced myself to finish first chapter, and the pacing of that final mission is why this screenshot exists. Though to be honest with you, I'm not really proud of it. The first hours are slow. You don't know the characters yet, you don't care about their conversation, you grab a dinner with some random guy, you sing together, you beat up some drunkards in an alley, and that's it. But by the end of chapter 1 everything clicks. You're framed for a murder on the most valuable plot of land in Tokyo. Your clan abandons you, law enforcement and Yakuza are both against you. Yakuza 0 is one of the best written games ever, so I won't spoil it, but I bring it up because of its pacing. It follows the same pacing curve found in some of the greatest literature of our history. Tension constantly rises, but it never stays on the same level. You can't design a story with non-stop action. Every great story, game, movie, book needs downtime. Lord of the Rings understands this. Hobbits complain about second breakfasts and then they accidentally reveal themselves to Nazgul when they are having a picnic. Shrek 2, the greatest sequel ever made, does the same thing. The gang watches TV before breaking Shrek out of prison. Souls games have iconic gameplay moments, enemies waiting to push you off cliffs, poison swamps, locked doors that don't open from this side, but many Souls-likes overuse these moments. In Mandragora, the first 5 or 6 doors I found all said, "does not open from this side." I understand why shortcuts exist, but when they are everywhere, they kill pacing. They force constant backtracking and make you remember dozens of locked doors and paths. Mandragora is still a great game, don't let this nitpick ruin it, but pacing is where it struggles. The new Lords of the Fallen has a similar issue. Almost every cliff has the same NPC waiting to push you off. After the 3rd one in 10 meters, it stops being surprising and it just becomes annoying. When overused mechanics turn into their own minigames, they pull the player away from the core experience. To build good pacing, a game needs to be divided into segments. Each area and the boss at the end should be designed together. Before reaching that boss at the end, you need a mix of difficult encounters, simple fights and quiet moments where you explore and just find loot. And between major bosses, there should be simpler ones, so the truly important fights actually feel important. And apart from pacing, games are a form of art and they should be treated as such. There are many ways to make a good game. One thing From Software constantly gets right is that they understand games are art. So many small moving parts come together to build something that feels distant from traditional art, yet games borrow heavily from established artistic disciplines to create something beautiful. There are very few forms of literature that can come close to the storytelling potential of a well-written video game. Art style, when given the care it deserves, can result in scenes that feel like they came straight out of a painting. But no game needs to be perfect. A good Souls-like deserves its own identity so that it doesn't end up as a simple Dark Souls clone. Overall, I still dislike most Souls-likes because their motivation often feels like, let's just build our own version of Dark Souls. But there are also many Souls-likes that manage to create something unique and genuinely interesting. Nioh with its combat leaning towards the arcade side, Lies of P with its strong narrative, No Rest for the Wicked, and first Berserker Khazan. There are quite a few Souls-likes that deserve more recognition among the pile of games that exist purely to capitalize on the genre. But what do you like about Souls and Souls-like games? What are your favorites? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's have a conversation there. And thank you for sticking around until the end. Like the video if you enjoyed it, or dislike it if you didn't, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.